Okay, thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. First of all, I want to thank the organizer for this invitation and for this great opportunity to reflect together on the challenges and that theology poses and receives from our society. I have also to apologize for my very bad English, you know. I think it's also a thing we have to reflect about, no? Because why do we have to speak in English all together? Yeah? Since everybody here, I think, speak at least one language more than English, no? We can just make this test, no? How many people here speak one language more than English? And two languages more than English? And 3 languages more than English? So, you know, maybe we have to reflect about it, because why we have to just nivelize everything with English, you know? Of course, it seems to be the more easy way, but I don't think it's the more easy way, and I think we lost a lot of things speaking just English. But maybe in another opportunity we can reflect about the Bible stories, for instance, from this point of view. But I will not speak about this today. If we are to reflect on this question, this challenge of the transforming power of theology in our society and our societies, we must first reflect on what it means to do theology. Who is its actor? In what places and with what tools? And this is what I will develop first. Well, that's okay. So, what does it mean to do theology? Then I will tell you about some experiences I had the chance to live, to participate, one in Nicaragua and another one in Italy, to give a concrete thought or a concrete dimension to this thought. And finally, in conclusion, I will propose some aspects, some questions, some thinking we can discuss. So, for the first one, my theme is all theologians. I refer here in particular to a work of a colleague whom I worked a lot in the Protestant faculty in Paris, and who unfortunately died last year. But he wrote a book whose name is this, All Theologians, Raphaël Picon. And with him and with this reflection, I would to propose a very large definition of theology. What do we mean when we talk about theology? We speak of what we say about God, about everything that produces an image of God or a proposition about Him. In that case, if this is theology, there is no precondition, no one person is more competent than another, there is no prior need for any religious experience to speak of God. And if everything that produces an image of God is theological, this production is, in our view, Christian when it is founded on what Jesus Christ teaches us about God in a Bible that is always to be interpreted and made meaningful in the light of human experience. It is thus theology open to all, for ordinary people, open, in an open space, we could say, a theology in open space, which is not simply aiming to convey already constructed theology or theological convictions, even by inventing new forms of communicating them, but which can also be an opportunity to innovate and to be creative. Theology is built in the history and experience of human situation. Gustavo Gutierrez, one of the first theologians who wrote a book of liberation theology, insists on this fact. Theology is second, not secondary, but second in relation to our experience. First, we live, and we think. To be a theologian is to be inhabited by the concerns and the expectations of a world in which we live. For example, to speak of the God of creation today, when Berlin is turning into a city with a tropical climate because of the global warming, becomes a new challenge, which Luther did not have to deal with. But to say that theology calls for invention is also to say that God remains above and beyond any definitive theology, because he never allows himself to be reduced to what reveals him. What he says of God never exhausts the whole of it. Thus, all theology and every theology is partial, provisional, contextual, limited, and called to meet and to dialogue with other theologies, anxious to integrate a diversity of sensibility and ways of understanding the world and spiritual intuitions. And one can even go further in this reflection about what is theology with André Mallet, who is a specialist of Bultmann, and who say, not only can we consider to be atheists a knowledge that denies God, but much more profoundly, all knowledge that is affirmed to know about God. A theology of universal priesthood, a popular theology that offers those who participate in it the possibility of saying I, and thereby attaining to spiritual freedom, is, from my point of view, a theology we can improve. A theology for existential and spiritual liberation, which liberates those who practice it against any form of ecclesial or dogmatic authoritarianism. It also frees us from the idea that we can express all that God means for everyone until the end of time. This is the style of theology which, for me, can make sense in the world in which we live. In short, a theology that goes from anywhere to everywhere, made by everyone, all who want to try, and freely. So, how do we go about it? There is, of course, not just one way to do it. I would like to tell you about two experiments carried out over the last few years that have enlightened and uplifted me in this process. Some concrete experiences. The first one is theology from women in Nicaragua. Let's start with Nicaragua. You are going to tell me that, quite rightly, that Nicaragua is not in Europe, and that we are talking about transforming society in Europe. But I think that we have also to always think in dialogue with others' realities. And for me, the Evangelical Faculty of Theology in Managua, in Nicaragua, is a sister faculty that is studying issues very similar to those we are thinking about in Paris. For instance, what does it mean today to teach theology? How to do it with an online program, for instance? How to promote a serene intra-Protestant ecumenism and a more larger ecumenism among students? All these themes are commune in both faculties. The FET, which is the Evangelical Faculty in Nicaragua, presents itself as a member of CIET. CIET is a bigger institution which faculty is part of. It's a center inter-ecclesial for theological and social studies. And it promotes a theological education nourished by the values of gospel, human development, socio-pastoral reflection, interdisciplinary research, openness to ecumenical dialogue, plurality, and interculturality. And all this to improve the quality of the ministries in the churches and the community programs, through programs articulated with each other to work towards an integral theology, an integral theological education, which takes into account different programs and different themes as the development based on solidarity, eco-theology, the rights of children, reproductive health, and so on. There is much to be said about this work, but I will refer to one experiment in particular. And this experiment is the Theology from Women. It is one of the programs improved by the staff of the faculty you can see here. Nicaraguan women live in a very violent and machist society. And this is also found in churches. You know, the words don't stop at the beginning of the churches. Inside of the churches also there is machism and violence and invisibility of women. In the context of a training program offered by the Evangelical Faculty, a specific program of theology for women has been set up and developed over the last 15 years. It has been also improved in Cuba and Mexico in some occasions. Through regular groups meeting with many debates, questions, shared reading of biblical text, changing the way participants look at the world they live in, and giving them tools to reflect, analyze, and change their daily life and their life in the church. It is aimed as women pastors, leaders, and members of different churches to enable them to recognize themselves as protagonists by elaborating a theological reflection based on their perspective and experience, to read the Bible in such a way as for it to be liberating. Also with a liturgical and therapeutic aspect that allows them to heal wounds and regain self-confidence. Through the rereading of biblical texts from a critical feminist perspective, and we don't call it the feminist program because in some churches this would have been very difficult to enter, you know. So it's better to enter the program without the title than to not enter the title. But it is a critique feminist perspective. So in this process, stories of forgotten and discreetly killed women have re-emerged, particularly for the question they posed about the violence of the patriarchal society towards the woman and the various abuses to which they were subject. Women who are struggling for life, women who die, women protagonists, subject of intrigues and heroic acts, women who are the object of all forms of violence, women's lives are present in the Bible, often through a fleeting presence, an allusion, a silence, a slight touch, as if glimpsed fleetingly, but for those who don't not hasten the search for other interests or emergencies, these feminine presence open up a vast field of reflection. Thus, in this program, these texts have been studied for 2 years with several leading threads that take up the evolution of feminist studies on text, the concern of depatriarchize the Bible. Reading is at the same time cause and the result of a patriarchal, androcentric, and sexist vision of the world that legitimizes the subordination and marginalization of women. This has led to rereading the most violent texts, such as the sacrifice of the daughter of Jephthah, for instance, or the assassination of the concubine of the Levite, of Judge 19, and to unmask implicit values and revive invisible subjects, victims silenced in the dominant patriarchal culture of the authors of this text, but also in that of the commentators. You can look for a long time, for instance, the text of Judges 19 was not so much commented, the assassination of the concubine of the Levite. This reading also reveals the wall of a sacred relationships confiscated by men, and where the experience of women is systematically ignored or undervalued. The role of women in church history is also re-emerged with this study, and many of the women involved in these groups have sought the memory of important female figures in their church and have rewritten the story of the church from their point of view. So in a first moment, the rereading of biblical texts from this critical feminist perspective is the depatriarchalization of the Bible. Also, the rereading of texts fundamental to theology, such as Genesis 2:3, or those of Jesus' encounters with ordinary women who become disciples, messengers, witnesses of the gospel, or as Paul's recommendation of the conduct of women in the assembly as he surrounded himself with collaborators whose ministry he recognized. For instance, you can see it in Romans 16, where he makes a lot of salutation to many women who are working there, as well as the criticism of the language and images of the female body gradually allowed the perspective to be shifted. Of a descriptive approach to women, as objects of study, which is most of time the first step. We can reflect about, the reflection focused on women as subjects of reading, resuming the study of the societies in the periods of the production of a biblical text, highlighting elements not taken into account. For instance, can we reconstruct the social history of women in the ancient Near East? And then the perspective changes the way to ask the question also. What does it mean to read the Bible as a woman? Is it a predefined essential identity? But if we read it like this, we are on risk to fall back into classification of a logic which is not far from the house is the natural domain where the woman exerts her talent and not in public arena. So if we pretend to have a feminist, an essential, even if it is feminist reading, we cannot go further. Better, we thought about reading Bible as a woman is a position, a specific situation of reader, each time situated in a particular social historical context. How to become the actor, the protagonist on one's life? It seems a very simple question, but it's a very complicated answer. By taking up the evolution of these groups over several years, we saw how they have in many cases been triggers for change. Some of these women who have made this program have made new life projects. They have opened a small business, started or resumed studies, began speaking publicly, assumed new responsibilities in their church community or in their social community, reorganized their families on other principles and habits, and sometimes divorced and distanced a violent partner. Their new look at their lives and the world. For instance, in this program we speak also about homosexuality, sickness, social and political commitment. All these new looks have also changed the way they are viewed. The Bible can be a source of oppression and enslavement, but it can also be a source of liberation. Just a little example, in these churches, and probably in others that you know, Proverbs 31, you know, the big description of this Wonder Woman who is a superwoman and who does everything and everything well. Is a text that in the church we read in the Day of the Mothers, you know, and this is the sort of aim that every woman has to reach, yeah? And every year, another time, we heard about this text. So we took this text and we tried to read it in another way, and it was very, very successful. So in this process, also different questions arises. For instance, what are the links between church and civil society? This is also a very complex question in some cases, because is it possible to surpass mutual suspicion, lack of trust from both sides, you know, especially in churches that are very suspicious about the world. You know. For instance, in this case, in this program, the women who come at the beginning didn't want to read feminist books which were not from Christian perspective. And after they realized that, for instance, in Nicaragua, there is a little book whose name is Boletina. It seems it has the name Review at the Feminine, you know, and it gives a lot of very nice insights and experiences, and it's a sort of network in Nicaragua between different groups, feminine groups. And at the beginning, they didn't want to read this because it was not Christian, you know. And more and more, they took the possibility to read this. And in the other side, the women who wrote the Boletina had many prejudice view about these women who were Pentecostal or different churches who were not generally engaged in the fight for rights of women. So it has changed both vision of people and of the participation, the possibility to participate in the same fight. So this is one experience, and the other one is the intercultural formation of lay preachers in Italy. I worked for a few years as a pastor in the Valdese and Methodist Church in Italy, and I had to organize an intercultural formation project for lay preachers over 2 years. The project was born from a synod of Valdese and Methodist Church in 2009, and was part of a larger reflection on being a church together, being church together since 2000. The idea of this program was not to think in terms of ethnic churches, but to try to organize inside of existing churches the arrival of many Methodists, Baptists, and other Protestant migrants in Italy, who completely changed the data of a very little Italian Protestantism. You know, in Italy, you don't think, if you think about Italy, you don't think about Protestant, yeah? Because you think about the Pope, but there are Protestants in Italy. And since 15 years, more or less, the aspect of Protestant churches changed a lot because of this massive arrival of migrants from Africa and East Europe and different provenance. The aim of this program was to take into account the presence of these brothers and sisters of different geographical and cultural origins in Protestant communities present in Italian territory, and to develop with them tools for preaching and exercising recognized responsibilities in the community with an intercultural dimension. So how to do that? Here are some points that have proved important. First, do not start from where you want to arrive, but where you are. Accept the weak points. Sometimes it's very difficult to make this, you know, because you want to reach the aim before making the job. So we choose to respect the processes in progress and the local structures as they presented themselves with their limits. One could not pretend to have a starting situation that should be yet an ideal situation. Interculturality is a challenge is an horizon. It's not a reality, most of the time. Of course, the process was slower and compromises had to be made, but it allowed to be rooted in the practices of the churches. For instance, the first group we made was not so heterogeneous. There were not so much women and young people, for instance, because the church were organized like this, and it was difficult to find participation from women and young people. But more and more it came possible. A second important thing is succeeding in clarifying where the agreements and disagreements are. And this makes it possible to recognize everyone as a subject and an interlocutor. But this requires a great deal of translation, mediation, explanation, and the mediating role of people already there for some time is very important. For instance, we had a problem at the beginning with the first group because many people have had different names. And it was very complicated to make a list of the participants because some of them, one day they had a name and the other day they had another name and we didn't understand how it was going on. So some of the groups explain that sometimes when they have no papers, identity cards or passport or something like this, and it's very complicated to have it, they can just borrow the passport or the card of another one who left the country or who had another story. So sometimes they have different identities, you know. And to think about, for instance, what does it mean to have a name and the significance of the genealogy has got another sense in this sort of complex situations. So the need to explain, to mediate, and to understand what's happened. Another example was, for instance, in the churches, these groups had a sort of solidarity fund, and when there was matrimony, when they have someone who had a difficulty, illness, death, everything, they have a solidarity participation for the family. But this didn't go through the normal way to do this in the Italian church, you know. So some people say, but they don't give the money in the church, and they have another money without any control, and it's not possible. So it's another time, the way to explain and to work with all the community to go and to grow together. So clarifying agreements and disagreements, because they are. Another thing is thinking of theological education that is not understood as a transfer of knowledge, but as an exchange and sharing of knowledges and experiences by alternating plenaries meeting, where a big experience of fraternity, discoveries, dialogue, exchange happened, and local small groups work to deep the study. We have worked on reading the Bible, preaching, learning the story of churches, their churches and the Italian churches, the organization of community. What does it mean, authority? This is a big problem and a big, nice discussion to have. The presentation of some theological themes, for instance, we had a nice discussion about what is the whole power of God, you know, because in the Italian church, one of the big way to present the all power of God is to say, yes, but God is powerful in his fragility, in the cross. So the power is in the no power, you know. But many participants of the group say, but we don't know, we don't want a God like this, because we are in the fragility, we are living totally in the precarity. So our God is a powerful God, and we want a very powerful God, not a fragile and you know, no powerful God. These themes and dynamics have sometimes been changed according to the evolution of the group and the processes of appropriation of context and of content. So this is also an important thing, the possibility to change the plan, you know. Another important thing is creative theology, elaborated from inside. It is an ongoing process of elaboration, feedback, evaluation, and creativity. One arrives at the meeting without a lecture or a lesson prepared or a PowerPoint very well done. We had a lot of different material, books, questions, and we try to take into account the experiences of the participants as the basic material. And we propose progressively what seems more consistent with perplexities, anxieties, curiosities of the participants. It is therefore a kind of continuous improvisation with an enormous preparation work before the meetings. And another very important point is a clear choice for a popular education methodology. This is also a very big challenge, because we start by listening to participants and analyzing personal and local experience, trying to transform reality when possible, because we do not want to offer a course with vertical teaching and books to read, but a process. Popular is a word full of history and ambiguity. Popular can mean very frequent and diffused in public, or well-known and loved by many people, which is not so much the case of immigrants in general in our country. The Protestant intuition of the Poors of Lion, you know, it was the movement of Pietro Valdo, who was initiating the Valdese church before Luther, and then of the Reformation, was to promote a type of popular education. We can also speak of the long history of the workers and revolutionary movements in the 19th and 20th centuries, and of the liberation movements in Central and Latin America and also in other continents. In what sense can we speak here of an experience of popular theology? Because this project is popular in the composition of the group. Many participants were fabrics workers, house domestic, some of them employed. They came from the popular classes of society and were often invisible and without consideration in society at large. Many had problems with papers, residence permits, work. So calling them as subjects, giving them visibility or letting them the opportunity to show this visibility in the church by recognizing their responsibilities is an important fact for all who were involved. It is also popular in its way of viewing education as a way of acquiring instruments for personal and community maturation. It is not about or just about writing papers or accumulating theoretical knowledge, but being attentive to observing and understanding what is happening in the community, society, and world, and thinking about initiatives to change them. It is popular in the methods used, the confrontation of experiences, active group methods, where the speech of everybody counts, where one does not organize a course for participants, but a process with exchange of knowledge, methods of work and reflection to develop useful skills for everybody in the communities. But precisely tensions can grow from the use of this methodology. Those who come and those who fought to a theological formation do not always expect a methodology of debate, an education in divergent thought, plural propositions of reading of a biblical text, when by education they are accustomed to transmission by authority, hierarchized way. In many cultures, the one who learns should not ask questions, and the one who teaches, especially the pastor, must have the last word on the subject. The proposition of looking for autonomy to think by the participants can generate frustrations and misunderstandings. Bible discussions have often provoked such reactions. But some of these students then took part in other action promoted by the Italian Protestant churches and which had an impact on local life. I would like to share one in Chicli. And here you will have just some slides in English so you can see what happened. We are thinking speaking about the flow of immigrants in Lampedusa and all these parts of this crucial challenge for European Union. This sort of question can be the basis of a theological reflection, you know, to those who ask, what was not it better to stay at home rather than die at the sea? I reply, it is the phrases of one of the immigrants. We are neither fools nor insane. We are hopeless and persecuted. Staying means certain death. Leaving means probable death. You, what would you choose? Or better, what would you choose for your children? What were you hoping to find in Europe? There is no work for us to, let alone for anybody else. I reply, we are looking for safety, future. We are trying to survive. We have no fault to be born in the wrong place, and you did not have any merit by being born in the right one. So here you have just some information about the Methodist and Valdesian Church. The map of Italy and Methodist Church involved in activity for refugees and migrants. The Methodist Church in Scicli, who is in Sicily, you see the very little village. So in Scicli there is a community, a Methodist community, who has rooted for many times. And they decide to make a guest house for the minor immigrants who were alone, including the congregation in this project, in order to make a visible presence of the immigrant. So they start in October 2014 to create a guest house for refugees. And obviously, everybody were not happy of this project, and they had some protestation, in particular from a neo-fascist group. And also a petition against the center that some people of village wrote, and accusing the church of looking for business with the migrants. They made many meetings in the church and in public places in order to explain the spirit of the initiative. And so where they were making theology, and they often use this quotation of John Wesley, founder of Methodism: unless God has raised you up for this very thing, you will be worn out by the opposition of men and devils. But if God be for you, who can be against you? Are all of them stronger than God? Go on in the name of God and in the power of his might. But this quotation also you can reflect a lot about what does it mean theologically, what can you interpret it. So the activities began. Okay. And after 10 months, the result was there. And I wanted to share with you this photo. It's very important. Is the Bibles that are found in Lampedusa when people arrived with the boats, you know, and there is a lot of Bibles lived here in. So that was the experience of Italy, and finally some more reflection to share. From these and other experiences, I have some questions I wanted to share with you and maybe to go on reflecting. The first is that to improve popular theology means to live the conflicts not to be afraid by the disagreements or the divergence, not to try to manage them, but to learn to live with. You know, conflict is life. You cannot avoid conflicts. And it's very important to try to go in the deep way in the conflict. Elizabeth Schlusser-Florenza wrote, "It is by conceptualizing them in the plural that we can convert the theoretical tensions and the practical conflicts that oppose them into creative possibilities of solidarity and dialogue." It should be interesting, for instance, but I will not do it now because we have no time, to reflect about the story of Ruth, you know, in the perspective of a conflict. It's a very interesting way to think about the conflict. And there is a lot of different ways to read the story of Ruth. I just show you, for instance, not ideas, but just image about the way to read the story of Ruth. So you see that we could make all a study about this. Another important thing is making choice. We have not necessarily chosen to be a Christian. Maybe we just born as in a Christian family. One does not necessarily choose one's confession, and certainly not the culture and the continent where one is born. We inherit a number of things that we have not chosen. But to be a Christian is to make choices. In a world where you do not choose everything. For instance, the interreligious question, which is different and complementary to the ecumenical question that has brought us here, is an instance of this. Because living in an interreligious world today is not an option, a choice. It is not a goal. It is a fact, a reality. And it is useless to seek to promote interreligiousness or to domesticate it or to control it, just as to reflect, to reject or exclude it in the name of our identity. We have to begin thinking and trying to live with an awareness of this multiplicity of religions, to recognize it, to receive it, and to invent a Creole language, a combination of languages coming together to enter into conversation by seeking new words, choosing what tint we will give to this intercultural reality. Because thinking together makes everyone more intelligent, more clever. And sharing spiritual visions of life make us grow. As Christians, like Jews and Muslims, in any case, we are all people who came from elsewhere, born in exile or hejira, because a word, a call, came to us in the midst of the tumult of our world. So I have to just pass for this. Toby Nathan say that one important thing is when we speak about hospitality, to make room for the shadows we have and also that the people have. The shadows is all our culture, all the history, all the experiences we have. Giving consistency to our hope, the promise becomes when the possibility, the assurance of a celebration of new departures, new paths, opening up bridges. how can we create new pacts and who do not start from scratch and that take into account the history of the subject, but lead them to live the present and the future as a hope, a chance never before experienced as a gift. So I will pass this. And I think that one important thing in this practice is to read the Bible together. And this is a very big challenge. And to never replace or substitute politics with theology, because we see today the ravages caused by those who are thinking for God and who designate themselves as the representatives of his interests on earth. Our practices are to be active and to struggle in institutions whose goal is to defend rights, to make politics, to proclaim justice. But each time our reading of the Bible comes to re-examine our practice, because each time there are new problems and things to modify, to improve, to rethink. We have so many things to do, but so many hopes and so many solidarities to build. Thank you. Yes? Well, I can stay here.
Thank you very much, Corinne, for a rich and challenging paper that brings together beautifully so many of the thoughts that we have been trying to integrate. Once again, we have the opportunity of posing questions. I know some people will discuss this in the group themselves and will have a chance to digest it. If there is something that you simply cannot bear to wait, can I invite you once again to come to this side? And can I plead on bended knees for a level of succinctness, brevity, shortness, as we go to our first and subsequent questioners. Hi, Steve.
Steve from Paris. I had a simple but very complex question. Because it seems on all your keynote lecture, one key word came most oftentimes, it is feminist, feminist. So according to you, what is to be a Christian feminist in the 21st century? Do you consider yourself as a feminist? And what is a feminist? Thank you.
Can we take a couple of questions and then?
Yes.
That would be good because we have a bit of time pressure. Jane.
Hi, I'm Jane from the UK. Did you just want to note that down before? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So I tend to minister in what I would say is fairly white, middle class, predominantly male environments. I'm very interested in alternative theologies, in alternative readings of Scripture, which I do try and present. And I come across a lot of resistance to that. And so I guess my question is, how can I work with people for whom the dominant kind of traditional patriarchal readings are the norm and who benefit from that? What is the good news for them of reading alternative theologies?
Thanks, Jane. One more question, and then we'll have some response from Corinne.
Yeah, thank you very much. You say theology is second, not secondary. And then there's a place you talk about the church. The church being suspicious of the world. The society living of trust. Let me say we are the church, then we're suspicious of the world. Not clear, please.
Yes. So I cannot answer and complete everything, but For the feminism, yes, I confess I am a feminist theologian, but I should not say a Christian feminist, because I think that the problem of the place of the women in the society is a problem of the society, of all the society, not just for the Christian one, you know. So I can have an action as a feminist in every dimension of the society, and the way my Christianity enter in this is to always question my way to act in the society, you know. And even in the feminist group, we have problems of competence or power or everything, like in every dimension of a society. But the action for feminism is feminism. There is not a Christian feminism, another feminism, a word feminism, from my point of view. Of course, there are, but I think that it's not a division like this, but it's the lecture, the Bible, and the practice in the community who come to question and re-examine my practice of feminism or every kind of engagement in the society, because I have always to come back on this and what we are doing and why we are doing it like this and not in another way, etc. The problem of communities, white and middle class, and how they can receive the good news, you know, of the theology. I think it was more or less the question you say. It's a very big problem for Europe, you know. We have to be changed by different persons. And I think that the change can always, or come always from the outside, you know. We cannot have a change just inside, because we never see that it's like this. It's a crisis. It's a new coming of a lot of immigrants in a place. A different, something generally also painful who provoke a change. So the problem is to not have frontiers and walls that cannot allow other people to enter. You know? The problem of many of our churches in Europe is that they are old and without children and with a lot of traditions and with no differences or no so much differences. But, so this is the problem. But also we can say that everybody can hear the good news of this. So it is possible also with the few people who are and how they are to start to maybe to discuss to other things that they always discuss in the church. And that maybe to think that the church is also a way, a place where we can speak about reality, you know, and reality of every day. And sometimes we don't have this possibility to put the word inside of a church. And maybe it's a way to go. I'm not sure to understand your question. It was about the church and the word and the, you know, in most of all in the churches where I was working in Nicaragua or in Mexico, they have, because they are churches who are very influenced about Pentecostalism or evangelicalism, they have this theology that there is the things of the world and the things of the church, you know, and the church is yet in some way the realization of a little part of the kingdom of God. So in the church we cannot have the same how could I say this? The same roots from the word. No? What is the word for a Christian church? Is it the word that God loves and for what He sent His Son? Or is it the place of the devil? To just summarize very in a very not. It's very difficult for me to say it in English, you know. But so it's very caricatural. But the problem of what is the relation between the church and the world is a big problem in many churches. So when, for instance, in Nicaragua, the women who had an action in the city were not the same but the women who was thinking about this in the church. So how we can make some links, you know, this was my point. But I don't know if it is answer to your question.
Nick Elom from Hamburg. I have two questions. The first one is the intercultural formation of lay preachers. The way you presented it, it seems like it's a way of teaching the people coming about the situation in Italy and to train them somehow. A kind of model that we have in Germany as well, very older, I believe. But my question is, have there been a way of encouraging the Italians in the Valdesian church to partake in this so that they also learn how those people do their theology, how they do their things? That is number one. The second thing is knowing a little bit about these migrant churches. I know people that we are calling lay preachers, their work in the church or with their communities is kind of a full-time job. There are situations that somebody from Ghana will have and may not call a pastor in the Valdesian church, but would rather call the pastor in the immigrant congregation. Now, are there structures in place to support these lay pastors financially so that at least they can reduce their neighboring job, their side work or something like that? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nick.
Good morning, I am Theo from Indonesia. It was a topic in one discussion, and where nowadays there are more women play roles in churches, we have more female theologians and so on. Church is also losing her identity in the society. Can you share your opinion regarding this? Thank you.
My name is Anna, I'm from Germany. Thank you very much. And I have a question about the example you gave us from Nicaragua, because I was wondering if there is any dialogue going on with the male leaders and the male parish members, including in that way of critical and feministic reading the Bible. Thank you.
About the lay preachers, of course, the aim of the group was to share and to have Italian people and different country origins. The first group, there were just 2 Italian people, and this was showing the problem, you know, that the first thing I saw, I said, because we wanted this, But at the beginning, it was not possible because more of Italian people said or thought, oh, it is a problem of immigrants. It is not our problem, you know. And obviously, it's not true. But more and more, it became something where also. For instance, there were a lot of people from Ghana, and they explained the way to see and to organize, and it became the first things. Most of the times that are said are some diffidences or some préjugés, you know. So it's important to explain this and to go after more and more deeper, you know. But of course, it's not easy to say what are the préjugés of both parts. But of course, and of course, also in this program, we tried not to have white people who were teaching to black people, no? And to have a mixed in the group and also in the responsible of the teaching. But it's always there are always better things to do in this in this aim. It was not possible to give money for this job, but it is not possible either for Italian or for foreigners people, you know, because the church in Italy, the Protestant church in Italy, is very small and has not many resources. It's a very minority church, so. About the male leaders in the program of feminist program, it was really the idea of this program starts from another program who was a biblical study program. And in these biblical studies, in the different way in Nicaragua, in different places, there were little groups who were studying Bible with questions, with investigation, and they were mixed groups. And we wrote also some little booklets, and in every one there was more specifically a text or some theme about the women. So speaking together in these groups of biblical studies, the women asked to have a special program for them, and in order to be able to discuss between them about this sort of problems. But of course, after, the idea is that when they can have their own space, they can also speak in the community and with leaders. And here we had all the palette of reactions. You know, some leaders were very grateful to have this program, and some leaders just didn't want to hear anything about it. And this lead me to your questions. I think that it's not true that the situation of the woman now, it's okay and no problem and everything is going well and everybody is convinced that the women are equal to the men, because in the grand majority of the world it's not like this. And even here, even in Europe, you know, women and men for the same job are not paid equally. And that's the reality.